For decades, the border between NATO and Russia was just a line on a map, a faint echo of a Cold War that was supposed to be over. Well, that echo is becoming a roar. Russia is reactivating its old Cold War bases and piling up its forces, making a huge bet that the most powerful military alliance in history will back down. It's a bad bet. From the frozen forests of Finland to the shores of the Black Sea, a new Iron Curtain is being forged. Permanent bases are being carved into the earth. Thousands of elite multinational troops are arriving, and they're not just here for a quick tour, they're here to stay. An arsenal of the world's most advanced weapons is on high alert. This isn't a drill, it isn't posturing. This is NATO's Eastern Front, getting ready for a fight it hopes never comes. The old tripwire forces are gone, replaced by heavy combat brigades ready to fight from minute one of an invasion. The alliance's center of gravity has shifted decisively to the east. So, what does this new front line actually look like? What are the pieces moving on this continental chessboard, and how is NATO preparing to counter a threat that's woken up and chosen violence? To get the sheer scale of NATO's response, you first have to understand the threat. The war in Ukraine wasn't a one-off event. It's the result of a new Russian doctrine. A doctrine that sees the world after the Cold War not as a peaceful settlement, but as a national humiliation that needs to be reversed. The Kremlin isn't hiding it anymore. They talk about a multipolar world, which is just a fancy way of saying they want to tear down the security system that's kept a fragile peace in Europe for decades. And these aren't just words. The entire Russian state is being rewired for war. Its massive industrial sector has one job now: churn out military hardware. While the West deals with peacetime budgets, Russia is producing artillery shells, tanks, and drones at a rate that has stunned analysts. General Christopher Cavoli, NATO's top commander in Europe, warned the U.S. Senate in April 2025 that Russia's military is rebuilding far faster than anyone expected. While it took devastating losses in Ukraine, Russia is on track to field a larger army than it had before the 2022 invasion. This isn't about defense. It's about projecting power and calling NATO's bluff on its core promise. Article 5, the idea that an attack on one is an attack on all. The Kremlin is gambling that this promise is just a paper tiger, that it can use a mix of military threats, cyber attacks, and political meddling to crack the alliance's unity. Moscow is testing every single seam. For years it was all about hybrid warfare, cyber attacks, disinformation, and political interference. Now that's being combined with a good old-fashioned military buildup. The provocations have jumped from the screen into the real world. In February 2024, Estonia reported massive GPS jamming coming from Russia. A month later, a Russian cruise missile casually flew through Polish airspace for 39 seconds before heading on to Ukraine. These aren't accidents. They're calculated probes, designed to test how fast NATO can react, to measure political will, and to make a state of constant crisis feel normal. The problem for NATO is no longer a distant what-if. It's a very real danger setting up camp just across the border. The Kremlin's strategy is shifting from poking to preparing. Across its western military district, Russia is drawing a new line in the sand and reinforcing it with concrete and steel. Satellite photos and intelligence reports don't lie. Dusty old Soviet bases are being brought back to life. New troops and gear are pouring towards the borders with Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland, even while the war in Ukraine eats up huge amounts of resources. The main event is the upcoming Zapad 2025 strategic military exercise. It's scheduled for September, but Russian troops and gear started rolling into Belarus in early August, supposedly for a defensive drill. But NATO planners aren't buying it. The Zapad exercises have a nasty habit of being dress rehearsals for the real thing. Zapad 2021, which involved around 200,000 troops, happened just months before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. A lot of those Russian exercise troops never went home. They just became the northern spearhead that attacked Kyiv. Minsk and Moscow say the drills are defensive and will be held far from NATO borders to reduce tensions. But their story keeps changing and the history is chilling. Ukrainian intelligence warns that Russia could be sending as many as 150,000 troops to Belarus for the exercise, which is way more than you need for a simple practice run. One Belarusian commander even said the drills would practice new forms and methods based on the war in Ukraine, basically signaling they're getting ready to use those lessons against NATO. This military pressure is backed up by a shadow war of sabotage, cyber attacks, and even weaponizing migration to create chaos on the borders of Finland and Poland. It's all designed to create confusion, tie up security forces, and see how much it takes to trigger a full NATO response. At the center of it all is a geographic nightmare for NATO, the Suwałki Gap. It's a tiny 65-kilometer strip of land connecting the Baltic states to Poland and the rest of the alliance. Squeezed between the Russian fortress of Kaliningrad and its ally Belarus, it's NATO's Achilles heel. A quick Russian move could cut off the Baltic states, leaving the alliance with a terrible choice: fight a massive high-risk war to get them back, or watch as 3 members are swallowed up. The fear in the small towns along the gap is real. People are stockpiling supplies because they know their homes are on the most dangerous fault line in the world. This Russian buildup isn't just a vague threat. It's a very specific preparation for a scenario that could ignite the biggest war in Europe since 1945. Facing this direct threat, NATO has kicked off its biggest transformation since the Cold War. The strategy on its eastern flank has flipped from a symbolic tripwire to a hard-nosed forward defense. The old plan was to have small forces that would trigger a bigger response if attacked. The new plan is to stop an attack cold, right where it starts, and defend every single inch of NATO land. This is NATO's multi-layered wall of steel, built with soldiers, concrete, and next-gen tech. Part A, the shield, a new kind of presence. The bedrock of this new defense is the souped-up Enhanced Forward Presence, EFP. These multinational battle groups, set up after 2014, started as battalion-sized units of about 1,000 to 1,500 soldiers. Now they're getting bigger and stronger. The 8 EFP battle groups stretch from Estonia down to Bulgaria, led by countries like the US, UK, Germany, and Canada. After the 2022 invasion, new groups were set up in Bulgaria, Hungary, Romania, and Slovakia. And they're not just symbols anymore. At the 2023 Vilnius summit, NATO leaders greenlit new regional defense plans that assign specific forces to defend specific territories. The goal is to beef up these battle groups into combat-ready brigades of 3,000 to 5,000 soldiers. Canada is already expanding its force in Latvia to a full brigade. And with Finland and Sweden now in the club, the whole strategic map has changed. Sweden is even expected to lead a new battle group in Finland, locking down the Baltic Sea region. Part B, digging in, the era of permanent bases. The biggest and most historic change is the move to permanent bases. For decades, the alliance followed the 1997 NATO-Russia Founding Act, which many saw as a ban on stationing large permanent combat forces in the East. That agreement is now ancient history. Germany is leading the charge. In a move not seen since World War II, Berlin is permanently sending an entire heavy armored brigade to Lithuania. The Panzer Brigade 45 was officially activated in Lithuania in the spring of 2025, but it's a work in progress. When it's fully built out by 2027, it will be home to nearly 5,000 German soldiers and staff, plus their families. The main base is being built in Rudninkai, just 30 kilometers from the Belarusian border. This isn't a rotation. It's a permanent address. Lithuania is pouring hundreds of millions of euros into building everything from barracks and training grounds to schools for the German kids. The brigade will be a powerful fighting force, armed with Leopard 2A7 tanks and Puma infantry vehicles. To make sure everyone's on the same page, Lithuania is even buying the same Leopard 2 tanks. The message couldn't be clearer. As German officials put it, Lithuania's security is our security. The protection of Vilnius is the protection of Berlin. Part C, the spear, sharpening the tools of war. A wall is no good without a spear. To make sure its forces are ready, NATO has massively ramped up its war games. The steadfast deterrence exercise series, the biggest NATO has held in decades, involves tens of thousands of troops practicing these new defense plans. Germany's Quadriga 2025 drills are a huge part of this, specifically designed to practice rushing forces to the eastern flank. They test everything, from moving tanks by train to commanding troops under fire. These drills are intentionally timed to overlap with Russia's Zapad exercises, sending a very loud signal of readiness. At the same time, Poland and Lithuania are running their own massive drills, calling up reserves to practice defending the Suwałki Gap. This show of force is backed by serious hardware. F-35 fighter jets are a common sight over the Baltics. Patriot air defense systems have been moved east to form a shield, and Poland is on a historic military shopping spree, buying hundreds of American Abrams and South Korean K-2 Black Panther tanks. It's in the process of building what will soon be Europe's largest and most modern tank force. Part D, the brain, a new strategic mindset. Behind all the hardware is a new way of thinking. NATO has a new force model that aims to have over 300,000 troops at high readiness, ready to deploy in days, not months. Before 2022, the NATO response force was only about 40,000 troops. The new goal is to have at least 100,000 soldiers ready to move within 10 days. Politically, the alliance's center of gravity has shifted east for good. Poland, the Baltic states, and Finland are no longer just voices in the room. Their views are now central to NATO's strategy. For years, they warned about a resurgent Russia. Now, their calls for a powerful, in-place defense have become official alliance policy. This total strategy, more forward troops, permanent bases, huge exercises, and a high-readiness force pool, is NATO's answer. It's a wall of steel, built not to provoke but to deter. The result is a tense, high-stakes game of chess playing out across Europe's eastern frontier. Every Russian move gets a NATO countermove. Russia gathers troops for Zapad 2025, and NATO answers with massive exercises like Quadriga. Russia reopens a base near Finland, and NATO responds by making the Baltic Sea a strategic nightmare for Moscow. The Suwałki Gap is still the most important square on the board. Germany's permanent brigade in Lithuania is a direct answer to that problem. By parking a heavy armored force right in the path of any potential invasion, NATO is fundamentally changing the Kremlin's risk calculation. Any move on the Baltics wouldn't just meet a small tripwire force, it would mean a head-on collision with a major German combat brigade from the very first hour, guaranteeing a massive war with a major NATO power. This strategy is called deterrence by denial. The point is to make it painfully obvious to Moscow that a quick victory is impossible. The goal is to prevent a war by being completely, unquestionably ready to win one. But cramming so much military power into one area creates a powder keg. While NATO's buildup is defensive, there's always the risk of a miscalculation. In a crisis, the line between an exercise and an invasion could get terrifyingly blurry and could lead to an accidental war that nobody wants. The peace of an entire continent now rests on this delicate balance, where strength is the only language that matters and readiness is the only thing standing between us and catastrophe. NATO isn't just talking anymore, it's building. The Eastern Front is being reforged from a line on a map into a fortified wall of collective defense. The permanent German brigade in Lithuania, the bigger multinational battle groups, and the relentless large-scale exercises aren't just temporary fixes. They are the new long-term reality of European security. This is a direct response to a threat that has made its intentions perfectly clear. These are preparations for a war that nobody in Brussels, Warsaw, or Washington wants. But in the cold, hard logic of geopolitics, the only way to stop that war is to be brutally prepared for it. The wall of steel rising on Russia's border is the ultimate expression of that logic. A deterrent built of soldiers and alliances, designed to preserve a peace we can no longer afford to take for granted. For more in-depth analysis on geopolitics and military strategy, and to stay informed on the evolving situation on NATO's eastern flank, make sure you subscribe to the channel.